Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today for Taking Action Together. My name is Haley Wells, and I am the Community Program Manager at the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. I would like to warmly thank our many partners who are listed on our website and who have helped us spread the word about this program series. I would also like to thank the AGC team for helping with all the details of this program, big and small. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. This program is being conducted on Zoom webinar. Our speaker will leave time at the end to answer your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. Click on that button to submit your questions. This program is also being recorded, and we hope you will share the recording with your friends who are not able to attend today or anyone else who might be interested. We're pleased to offer this program at no cost, but if you find today's session valuable, we'd greatly appreciate a donation of any size to help us continue providing meaningful programs. You can make a gift easily through our website, and we'll share the donation link in the chat. Our speaker today is Carolyn Enger, who is an American pianist and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. She studied at the Manhattan School of Music, and she is a Steinway artist. Carolyn has enjoyed remarkable success as a recording artist and has been recognized by the New York Times for her Piano Album I and Six Friends. Carolyn has also toured across the United States and beyond, including at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, the United States Military Academy West Point, Carnegie Hall, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Carolyn recently published her article, The Mischlinge Expose, Stories of Assimilation and Conversion in the book Women Defying Hitler, Rescue and Resistance Under the Nazis. Carolyn is dedicated to bringing music to diverse audiences in accessible civic spaces, and she is here today to talk about her multimedia documentary project, The Mischlinge Expose. In past programming, we have featured a variety of speakers who have discussed the power of dialogue and the ways in which tough, respectful conversations can bridge seemingly insurmountable divides between people. On the other hand, one way that communication breaks down is when people view themselves and others in totalizing terms. When we are unable to comprehend or accept the variety of identities within us, and especially when we view others in the singular terms of purely good or purely bad, then the way we approach dialogue becomes about us versus them. As a result, discourse becomes combative. To accept the variety of identities and perspectives each of us holds, then, often becomes the first step to overcoming us versus them thinking and approaching dialogue with more empathy and more willingness to truly learn from the other person. In her presentation today, Carolyn will speak about the German Mischlinge, which was a derogatory term the Nazis used to describe those neither fully Jewish nor fully Aryan. The Mischlinge beautifully embody the multiplicity of identities we all hold within us. Through speaking about these people who have historically been caught between worlds, Carolyn will encourage us to foster a greater acceptance for the variety of identities each and every person in this world holds, so that we can see pieces of ourselves in others and pieces of others in ourselves, thus equipping us with another tool to build a more diverse and inclusive world. Now, please join me in welcoming Carolyn Enger.
Thank you so much, Haley. I very much appreciate your beautiful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'll start by saying that I've been reading and pursuing this topic for probably between 20 and 30 years now. I feel the importance of speaking out about diversity, tolerance, and identity is especially needed now, and that I can use music as a vehicle for spreading a message of social justice. We can make a difference as individuals and accept people who are different from us with compassion and empathy. My family history is interwoven with stories of important cultural figures in the film that we're about to watch, who share parts of this history. My grandmother, Charlotte Popelauer, converted from Judaism to Christianity after marrying my grandfather. She passed away before the war. My father was about 7 years old. I'll skip around just a little bit, and I very much welcome your questions afterwards. On January 20th, 1942, in Wannsee, Germany, a conference was held to work out the plans for the destruction of the Jewish people. Among the things that were discussed at this conference was who was to be considered a Jew and where and how the Jews were to be annihilated. The problem that the Nazis and the attendees at this conference had was that many German Jews had already assimilated, and there was a lot of intermarriage. And so some of the people at the conference had family members who may have fit into these racial categories of being mixed. And it was a problem, because the German population would not have accepted extermination of family relatives because of racial, false ideas around racial purity. Initially, my father had been drafted into the army, and then in 1943, the Mischlinge had been kicked out of the army. So what was he to do, being on the streets, a young man, not in uniform? He faked a limp with a cane so as not to be suspected by his neighbors for not being in the army. He worked as an apprentice in textile and commercial art and worked on blueprints during the war. And you'll see some of his artwork throughout the film. Eventually, in 1944, he was put into a forced labor camp specifically for Mischlinge. In the forced labor camp, he dug ditches to fortify against the Russian tanks coming. And of course, when the Russian tanks came, they drove right over these ditches. So he would joke around about that, thinking that his work had been just useless work in order to, I don't know, sort of take the life force out of these prisoners. After he escaped from the camp, he made his way down to Augsburg, where he had a commercial art business and a storefront. And given that Augsburg is in a very Catholic area in Bavaria of Germany, he had been hired to draw the 12 Stations of the Cross. It was not out of religious conviction on his part, but rather a commercial enterprise. And you'll see some of these drawings in our film. One of them is especially meaningful for me, the one that's a close-up of the rest of the drawings, called Leid, which in German means grief or sorrow. And as I was, this drawing used to hang on the wall near wherever I was practicing, next to my piano. And I thought that somehow or another, this drawing was an outpouring of emotions for him post-war. So you'll see, and you may have your own impressions of this drawing. He was not able to immigrate to the United States until 1947 because the Mischlinge were kind of caught in between, not being fully Jewish or non-Jews. There were very many agencies that were trying to work to get the survivors and refugees out of Europe during the war and post, actually mostly post-war. So finally, the United Church World Services sponsored my father and his first wife to come to this country. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because this sense of not being in one place or another in terms of purity of identity kind of followed him even after the war. Not being able to get, the Jewish agencies were really full to capacity in terms of getting people out. So fast forward, I was raised as a Christian. I was baptized by my godparents. My godfather was a German Jew, and my godmother was also a Mischling. So it was kind of a mixed identity for me as well, being brought up as a Christian, and my godparents were basically German Jews. And so it's kind of, a bit of a soup, all the mixing around. So you'll see a lot of original documents in the film. My father returned to Germany after the passing of his father. I don't know, I was probably 18 or so, and he brought home a notebook filled with family documents, many of them having Nazi seals and insignias stamped on them, which raised my curiosity and felt kind of frightening because my father did not speak about his experiences very much. So to see these family documents with these, Nazi stamps on them, it had a shock value to it. I was very curious and tried to ask him questions, and he sort of gave very, very incomplete answers. Um, so, with my own journey, then I was at Vassar College studying piano. Didn't like the piano teacher there, and in the meantime, my piano teacher that I had worked with during high school landed a college position, teaching position at Malloy College, which is a Catholic college, and required 9 credits of theology. So how is this? How does this relate to my story? One of the classes that I took to meet my theology requirements was an intro to Judaism. And from that point on, I started identifying Jewishly and then went through 2 different conversions. I went through a Reform conversion over 20 years ago, and then at some point I was thinking about making Aliyah to Israel. And in order to do so, I needed an Orthodox. I didn't need an Orthodox conversion to move to Israel, but in order to be married or baptized there, married or buried there, it required an Orthodox conversion. So I went through an Orthodox conversion, and now, in a sense, I have my Jewish passport. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the chief rabbinate in Israel about the necessity for an Orthodox conversion, but it's worked out in my personal life. So I would say that my dad had a very upbeat attitude about being here in the United States. He was very, very proud to be an American and very proud of his accomplishments. While I was going through these conversion processes, I would say that was he was concerned about me being Jewish. He wanted me to make sure not to be on any list. And I would argue with him about, in a sense, like, what's the difference if I go to a place on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning to worship? And he said, well, okay, fine, don't be on any list, don't join. I would say that he was mostly concerned about my physical safety. He felt that all religions were political. He didn't really identify religiously. And I would say his children were probably his religion. So with this project, I hope to convey a positive message, empowering people with pride and confidence without shame or pressure to hide, acceptance both internal and external. Hopefully, it's about peace between us. Thank you very much.
Can you define the word Mischling?
Mischling is a mixling. It's a German word for a mixling. You are of mixed race, but it's evenly distributed between 2 grandparents being Jewish and 2 grandparents being Aryans. So that was the denomination that they gave us. Half Aryans, half Jews. It was a term that was interchangeable, because since Hitler was not interested in the religion of the people, but he considered the Jews an undesirable race. And as far as he was concerned, everybody who descended from Jews, even partially, was undesirable and was not expected to pass on any Jewish blood. Questionnaires were always asking, what's the religion of your grandparents? It never said, what's your religion? That was unimportant. What's the religion of your grandparents? And that automatically branded you as a half-Jew if you said 2 are Jewish. what was interesting about that family and about a lot of other families in Germany in those days was that the generation of my grandfather were very much assimilated to being German first and Jewish second.
We are on the list, you know, maybe 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. Our day was coming.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
100%. It was a law.
These laws were passed gradually. They were passed for the Jews in 1933. For the Mischlinge, they appeared in 1940. At that time, the half-Jews, the Mischlinge, had been drafted into the army when the war had started in 1939. And my brother, who was there together with a friend from Breslau, who was a non-Aryan, not a half-Aryan, but a non-Aryan. So he fled over the Pyrenees to Spain, and from Spain he went to England and saved his life this way. My brother did not dare do that. He wanted to. But since he thought and he knew that he was supposed to go into the army, he was afraid that Hitler or the Nazis would take it out on his family if he, as a German potential soldier, is fleeing into another country and is not coming back. So he came back. And they had just passed another law. There was a new law, they didn't want them anymore, so they sent them back, and they did not draft any new ones. But it was a slow degradation of the lifestyle. It was going from worse to worse.
Her brother had contracted tuberculosis in an internment camp in France and recovered well in a sanatorium in Germany. He was on his way to a summer hotel job near the Swiss border, but he disappeared en route. They reported him missing.
The trains were regularly raided by the military and the Gestapo. So one of the two, I'm not sure which, probably the Gestapo, saw his military pass that he had, which identified him as a half-Jew. He was a tall, blonde guy and stuck out in those days, in 1943, like a sore thumb, not being in uniform and fighting for his fatherland. So somebody didn't like that, took him out of the train.
He was passed from Gestapo prison to Gestapo prison until they anonymously received a phone call that he was in Breslau. Each of them, including her non-Aryan mother, went to the prison to petition for his release. Finally, one officer told Rosemary that if she came back the next week, he might have some information.
And then he looked in his files and he said, "Your brother has been shipped to Auschwitz." So I immediately got in touch with my parents, and my father got on the train to go to Auschwitz and rescue his son. Well, he never got to Auschwitz, of course. I mean, they didn't allow tourists or regular persons to get there. So he came back, and then we got a letter from my brother. He was allowed to write. We have 2 letters from Auschwitz. And in the last one that was dated the 4th of July, he did not write the letter himself. It was written in some other's handwriting, but he signed it. And it said the news about John, or some other name, about his TB breaking out again is very sad, and I hope that he will recover. And we, of course, knew that he was talking about himself. And then several weeks later, my father was ordered to the Gestapo in Breslau and was handed a death certificate that was dated the 8th of July. So he died on the 8th of July, supposedly.
While we worked very hard and also had a limited amount of food, our spirits were relatively good because of the radio reception we had, and we saw that the end of the war is near. When the Russians were as close so that we could hear the cannons, our guards as well as we decided to move further west, and our guards put us into a heavily wired prison camp, and we thought we were caught in a bad position. We tested the wires and the barbed fences and found out they were not electrified, so we slept the night there and then went as a group further west. By that time, we walked through forests and heavy snow, and it was physically very draining to, after the hard work at the camp, to keep on marching through the snow.
And anyway, I went onto a freight car and I collapsed. For 3 days I was on the freight car and I don't know anything what happened there. Anyway, it wound up to be to go to Vienna, around Czechoslovakia. The Russians came again, so we all found a bicycle each, 4 bicycles, and a little cart about that size, for all our things on top there, including a typewriter. We needed a typewriter, obviously we needed a typewriter. And with the typewriter, we got some paper, because it was still Nazi time, you see. So we always typed a letter that we were on our way on an important mission, and we needed food stamps. So we went to all those village burgermeisters or mayors, and we got food stamps, and then we could eat. Right? And when we went as far as Kaufbeuren im Allgäu, and that's where we knew the Americans would come.
What inspired me to create this project, this gathering of materials and experiences to explore this issue of identity and conversion, comes from a personal story, my family history, and my own story. I hope to inspire my audience to think of these things for themselves in their own families, in their own interior lives. What does it mean to be who we are? How can we see each other in a more compassionate light and not look for binding definitions of each other, but rather opening up and seeing that we're many combinations of many things. That gives us a lot of freedom to explore ourselves and to have greater and deeper understanding for other people. Ultimately, I want to erase lines that divide us and inspire people to feel at peace within ourselves and with each other.
Okay, we will now have, we have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A, and I have a pretty good bunch of questions I'm looking through right now. And while I'm going through them, may I just say, Carolyn, like, this is the second time I have seen this film. I loved it even more this time around. You are just the most incredible pianist. Your music is beautiful, and I'm blown away like every time I see even a little part of this. So I did just want to start by saying that.
Thank you. Thank you.
But a question that sort of came up for me, and I get to ask mine first since I'm doing Q&A, is it's really interesting to me the way you sort of brought together music, you specifically classical music, and the testimony of survivors, which are two sorts of things you don't often see brought together. And it's really a very, very interesting way that you've brought them together. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that choice to combine music and testimony, and as well sort of the way that music, especially when we're talking about Holocaust history, can be its own form of memory or testimony, and how those two work together.
Thank you. Well, I knew that I'm not much of a writer. I mean, I'm able to certainly send nice emails, but I'm not I wouldn't say that that's one of my strongest suits. And I knew that my father had wanted to tell his story. He had actually, when we first heard him on the film, before we saw him actually in the video, we heard him speaking, and that was from a conversation that he had had with my niece, who may have had some kind of a high school project. She came to New Jersey from Illinois to sit and talk with my father. She may have had some kind of an assignment to, somehow trace her family heritage or something. And so those were all conversations. That was from a few days of conversation with my father. And and he thought that in sitting down with my niece, that they were going to start to write a book together, which didn't happen. And young people don't usually have that kind of time. And so he was kind of, if you could hear in his voice, he was in a sense a little bit methodical in the way he was speaking, and because thinking that this was all going to be kind of written down and there would be chapters and all. And after he passed, in his belongings, I also found business cards for self-publishing, and also for publishers. So I could see that he was definitely interested in having his story told, because of the fact that it's unusual. There aren't a lot of Mischling stories out there, and me not being much of a writer, but being a pianist, I thought, well, what can I do? And so the composers whose music I chose shared in this identity of, I mean, many of them, we saw, in a sense, an abbreviated version of this project. The longer version of it includes stories of the different composers. And I mean, we heard a little bit about we saw a little bit about the Mendelssohns, and let's say Rachel Varnhagen, the writer, and Solonier. But we didn't get information about Schoenberg's story, or Alexander Zemlinsky, or Hans Eisler, or Gustav Mahler. And so how did I select either writers or composers? Was that they had to have this kind of German Jewish / conversion experience within their families, and so in selecting those composers and then working with Carrie Fry, with all this, I had all this material, actual physical documents and all. And so in a sense, like slowly but surely, then we thought, well, okay, this should then work into a film concert experience, so that I can tell the story in my way, in a sense, using music, because this is my talent. So The other thing about music, in a sense, it can get used in so many different ways because it's nonverbal. So, and I mean, what's missing here, I mean, it comes across here, but there's a moment in the live performance where I'm playing this piece by Gustav Mahler. It's long and it's very emotional, and it it's from a song that he wrote, the Ruckert, from one of the Ruckert Lieder, and I had a transcription created for the piano part. So the music itself does not have to do with the Holocaust. Mahler is pre-Holocaust, so is Mendelssohn. But and it's hard to attribute, let's say, identity anxiety or so to a piece of music, unless it's kind of like really obvious, clashing sounds and all. But let's say to those Mendelssohn pieces, do we notice anything about his his conversion out of Judaism into Christianity? No, we can't really attribute that kind of a meaning to a piece of music. But then we could see in the letters that he and his sister shared that there was kind of this in between kind of sensation. And so in a sense, I wanted to explore, so with music, it does carry emotional weight, and in a sense, so when we receive a lot of information in a documentary, in a book or so, and music is somehow, part of the experience, I think it just activates different parts of our emotions. So that's how I wanted to put it together. So.
And I mean, I love it, as you know. I think it's so interesting, even though, like you said, there's this real, work when you're studying the history to not attribute somebody's, mental state to the reason the song was created.
Right.
But it's so interesting to see, you bring up these composers, you included writers, you include your father's own artwork, where for each of these people, sort of creative expression was a way of sort of, getting their story out there, getting a piece of themselves out there, and creation is a part of like identity. And so it's so interesting to me to see how all these different sort of creative works can be a way of sort of for people to make their voices heard, even when other parts of their identities, for the Mendelssohns, for example, were repressed. And I guess that brings us to a question somebody else asked, which is about, what can you say to people who are struggling with questions of identity today, who also feel caught sort of betwixt in between? And, you've sort of alluded to some of the guiding principles you live by, but could you share anything else about, how you deal with these sort of identity struggles in a world that is so divisive and divided and full of, just hatred?
Well, yes, for sure. And it's a great question. And in a sense, that's what this project is really. I mean, I did want to, in a sense, pay tribute to my father and certainly get his story out there and get the story out about the Mischlinge, and also explore that sensation of because it starts just even within ourselves of for example, after my Orthodox conversion, which is was more dramatic in a sense than the Reform conversion, because with an Orthodox conversion, I went to the mikveh, and there were some rabbis around afterwards, and I had to sign things, and they asked me questions that I had to agree to. One of them was really a very, very, very deep question of would I be willing to die to maintain my Jewish identity? And so where does that come from? That comes from forced conversions. Let's say, during in Spain, where Jews were forced to convert and then, practice their Judaism in secrecy. So that comes from a lot of, especially European Jewish history of this kind of being forced to convert kind of thing. So, I mean, that's a heavy duty question to answer, very heavy duty. I mean, like, I don't know, like on the particular day I might want to live. And so I don't know how I necessarily would live that moment. I hopefully never have to experience that. Um, so after that day of conversion, even into a few years following that, I would kind of feel like, well, I'd say something in Hebrew, or answer a question about, I don't know, with my friends in the area, answer some kind of question, using like a little Yiddish or something, and then feel internally sort of like foreign to myself. Like, here are the words coming out of my mouth, but who am I? And and so if just within ourselves, if we can feel comfortable kind of holding more than one identity. I mean, I'm not a believing Christian. My mother is, and I love her. And if I'm, want to celebrate Christmas, which is an important day for her, I'm going to be with her. I'm not going to kind of, separate myself out because of then, brick walls that then start to kind of define us or so, or sort of like, I'm here, I'm not there. Over time, we all change. And so if we're able to kind of hold a multiplicity of identities within ourselves, just for starters, like just first thing in the morning, I'm a lot of things, and one day to the next, I change. I mean, I thought I was going to do one thing and I'm going to do something else. And so that then magnified on a larger scale. I mean, one of the things that I like to do when somebody has sort of, where I don't agree with, a viewpoint, or I can't understand how somebody would have something, you can fill in the rest of the sentence. It can be whatever. Um, Taking an extra moment to say, well, let me think, if I were in their shoes, could I identify with some of the feelings that they might be feeling, of being afraid or upset or angry? And I'm like, yeah, I've had some of those feelings. And then all of a sudden, I'm feeling less of us, them. I mean, I don't, I've never had the woken up with the feeling of wanting to kill huge swaths of people. So, there's a psychopathic element to players on the world stage of wanting to, destroy, huge groups of people. And that I can't relate to that. And that, in a sense, so then that comes to the question of like evil, and what is evil, and how do we combat evil? How do we work with evil? How do we, I don't know, and I mean, I'm a bit of a thinker, but that's a stumbling block for me.
It's a tough question. We could probably spend about an hour saying what is evil. Maybe that can be the next Taking Action Together. We'll discuss what is evil and what do we do about it. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I guess let's do one more question. And I would love just for you to tell our audience a little bit more about some of the other projects you're working on, some other things that we can keep an eye out for, because they're all very related. So, if you could just say a few words about that before we wrap up.
Thank you. Should we do the question first, or me? Over to me.
You go ahead.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so I apparently have sort of adopted some kind of a do-gooder. I don't know if it's an adoption. It's just, it kind of swells out of me in terms of inspiring other concert projects. One of them is called Resonating Earth, which is also multimedia, has beautiful, I've curated from various very, very talented video artists, beautiful images of nature, and kind of inspiring a little attention to our environment, and with very, very serene meditative music. mostly of contemporary classical composers. Check it out because there's an album that just came out with this project, Resonating Earth. And one of the tracks apparently has been very well received on Apple Music, over 200,000 streams of this one track by a piece by Iman Habibi called In the Brittle Quietude. Very, very beautiful music. It's, you know, I appreciate your kind words about my playing, but these composers have also composed very, very beautiful music for that project. Another one that's may kind of hit on some of our conversations, Haley, is musical legacies. This one I'm very fired up about, so much so that I anticipate that it may end up being a multimedia as well, because as you mentioned in your intro, your kind introduction to me, about my recording of Ned Rorem's piano album 1 and 6 Friends, that album, the New York Times liked that album very much, it was a great honor. Ned Rorem is an American composer. He just recently passed. I thought that if I traced from his piano teacher and back, you know, in his sense, his musical heritage, you know, we all talk about our genealogical charts, right, with our parents and our grandparents. Well, you know, musicians can do this through their teacher, and then who taught their teacher. And we, you know, we like to kind of, well, yes, I inherited Beethoven's wisdom because of, if I follow my teachers back, I can go, you know, get back to Beethoven. Ned Rorem's teacher, a piano teacher, was Margaret Bonds, a very, these days now more well-known African-American composer from Chicago, female. So, okay, so between, you know, being in mid-20th century African-American in Chicago, a woman, you know, of course, her music didn't get heard a lot. She studied with Florence Price, also same situation, African-American, originally, I think from Arkansas, and then migrated to Chicago. And she was the first Black American composer to have her symphony performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. It was a big first. She studied with William Grant Still. He had also African American, so he had a number of firsts as well in the American, you know, classical music scene, who then studied with George Chadwick. So I'm forming a program with these performing music by these composers. And of course, now reading, like, you know, you saw the book list for this Mischlinge Expose. My book list is not quite that large yet, but with your book list, I'm going to be able to add to it. In a sense, exploring, you know, the experiences of African-American musicians, and then also in the mid-20th century, and then tying in with poems by Langston Hughes. And then, of course, we get into the civil rights movement. So this is all kind of feeding into this latest project, Musical Legacies. So yeah, those are the two big ones.
I did not plan this, but that sort of fits perfectly into my like little concluding statement, because our next Taking Action Together program sort of deals with the intersections between anti-Black racism and the Jewish experience in Nazi Germany. And this next Taking Action Together program will be with Dr. Jonathan Wiesen. He is a professor of history and the former department chair at UAB. And he is also a valued board member. And he specializes in Holocaust history, Nazi German history, and he will speak on his new book project, which focuses on the intersection between the Nazi race laws, which we learned a little bit more about today, and Jim Crow racism in the American South. So during his discussion, he will consider the similarities and differences between these two 20th century experiences of segregation and persecution. And by discussing Nazi racism and Jim Crow racism together, and pointing out how Nazis took inspiration from, you know, the Jim Crow race laws, this session should hopefully help viewers to recognize common features of discrimination across historical time periods. So we hope you will join us. It will take place on January 15th, 2025 at noon Central Time. And we will also, in the meantime, continue to add more programs that we hope you will find of interest. Thank you again, Carolyn, so much for your wonderful presentation, for the film, for the discussion. I wish we could talk more, but we are at time, so we're going to wrap it up. You will all receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this program, and we do get our best traction by word of mouth. So if you could share the recording with friends and colleagues and anyone who couldn't attend today, we would love that. And again, we are pleased to offer these programs at no cost, but if you found today's session valuable, as I did, we would greatly appreciate any donation that you can share to continue help us providing meaningful content. And you can make a gift easily through our website or through the link that has been shared in the chat. And finally, we wish you all a very happy, very healthy holiday season, and we can't wait to see you at our next program. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you again, Carolyn.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Haley.
All right, thank you, and we will see you all next time.
Looking forward. Thank you.